The Still Loading podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people on Patreon. Amazing people like Matt, aka Stormageddon, Eric H., Kevin from the Bit by Bit Foundation, Ryan K., Gilmer, Mr. Biscuits, and Stephen P. have all been wonderful enough to support the show over there, so if you would also like to get your name read at the beginning of an episode, along with a bunch of other goodies, go over to patreon.com/stillloadingpod and check out everything it has to offer. On this episode of Still Loading, heretics be purged. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I am your host, Josh Koval, and today's episode, it is a patron-voted one. That's right, on one of the quarterly polls, I did a boomer shooter. Oh my gosh, I can't speak. A boomer shooter themed poll. Apparently, I'm a boomer. I can't even speak. A boomer shooter poll, and that covered some of the games that were up for grabs. On that one was Doom, or oh my gosh, I forget. I bought all the games that I'm like, I want to play these games, so I spent like $50 on between all of them because they were luckily a sale was happening, and then I only ended up playing one of them. Proteus, that's what it's called, Proteus, which also looked really freaking cool. So Proteus, and I forget what the other one was. Not important, but the one that won that is important is Warhammer 40k Boltgun, or Warhammer 40,000k Boltgun. Warhammer
40,000k.
40,000k. That's like 100 million. Anyway, the voice you just heard, though, is my guest for this episode for the topic of Warhammer 40 whatever's Boltgun. Joining me today is returning guest to the show, Ryan Kern. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm 40k thousand good. Yeah.
40k thousand happiness stats. I don't know that. Anyway, I'm going to lose the thread real fast, y'all. We are talking about Warhammer 40k Boltgun, Boltgun. I think I was I saying Gunbolt earlier?
I didn't hear it enough to correct you. I think we're Boltgun.
All right, it's Boltgun. I'll find out. I'll find out in the edit. I might have to do some fancy editing later on. But yes, this was chosen by the patrons out of all the other boomer shooter options, and I was really excited to try this. I saw this first. I'm gonna kick this section off of our personal experiences. I saw this on a Games Done Quick stream. It was just called Boltgun. I'm like, what the heck is Boltgun? And I just kind of had it on in the background, and then after I saw what it was, I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. It's a boomer shooter. I haven't played one of those in quite some time. So I saw it there, and then I've been meaning to try it at some point. So when I was coming up with a theme for the most recent quarter's poll, I thought Boomer Shooter was a perfect one, so I put it on, and it won. So thank you to everyone who voted for it. Ryan, throwing it over to you, what's your experience with Boltgun?
Well, for me, so playing Doom 2, Duke Nukem 3D, Unreal, all the old boomer shooters I used to go over to my friend's house and play all the time. And honestly, what really sucked me in with Boltgun, outside of I just appreciate the art of it, but we can talk about that later. What really sucked me in initially was the launch trailer, where it's just over the top 90s nostalgia rad. You can hear the, heavy metal music playing in the background as it shows a floppy disk sitting on the person's desk, and they got this old-fashioned computer. And I swear that looked exactly like my friend's bedroom that we used to go in to play these games. So I was like, all right, you have my attention, Boltgun. I am going to have to look into this because you're hitting all the right nostalgia notes for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so solid. Like as soon as I got into it, it was immediately like, oh, okay, I'm picking up what they're putting down.
This was doing some research on this. The developer of this game, Arok Digital, they were really they had kind of mused before they got the approval to make this game. They had mused about like, wouldn't it be cool if there was a boomer shooter set in the Warhammer, the Warhammer world, and they just kind of mused about it. And then when they were able to do it, like a lot of the development members were ecstatic. Like they were so excited to do this, because I think, I even wrote it down. Where did I write it? Uh, I can't remember who I saw the interview of, but the team, like I said, the team was a huge fan of the Warhammer franchise, and a lot of them still had figures that they had personally painted back from the 90s, like figures that they had painted when they were kids.
You can absolutely tell the passion that the
Mhm.
developers have for Warhammer. I mean, all throughout the entire thing, there's constant references to the tabletop that, you can tell that lore and accuracy was important to these guys, even though the game doesn't have much of a story per se.
The
You can
story
tell,
is like non-existent.
but I love what story is there because it ties into another game that I'm a huge fan of. But even just from a gameplay standpoint, you can tell like, okay, someone sat there with a Warhammer 40K rule book and decided, all right, this enemy type has to do this thing, and we're going to have guns that do this, and they're going to act this way, and yeah. So I am not surprised at all to hear that everyone at Auric Digital are just big fans of Warhammer. Um, and I agree with the sentiment. Like it's kind of crazy that we didn't have a boomer shooter in the Warhammer universe until now. Like it's perfect for the fantasy of being an ultramarine. Like you
Hmm.
are a tank. You're just moving and mowing things down. It's great.
Now, I think this is a good time to go into our personal experiences with the Warhammer as a franchise, as a brand, which we talked a bit about it off mic. So I think this will be a short segment. Uh, I have zero to none. A friend of mine that I used to work with at a job many moons ago, he played it, and he actually was pretty good at painting his own figures. I will say one thing I love about Warhammer and the community is that just as much as people love playing it, they love custom painting their own figurines. Like that's a huge portion of the community, and like the enjoyment that the community has with the franchise is that you paint your own models, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. That's a big part of the experience from what I understand. I mean, I'm similar to you. I never had enough friends or money to really get into the tabletop portion of it. Um, and being honest, the lore is overwhelming to me at this
Yeah.
point because there's just so much. Like I'll go
Oh,
to the
I know none of
bookstore
it. I
and
know
I look at the
absolutely none of it.
40K section every once in a while, and there's like 4,000 books there, and I'm like, I could maybe read one of these if they weren't three times the thickness of a Russian novel. But um, I mean, my experience is I've played the games. I've been playing Warhammer video games for as long as I've been able to. I mean, the Dawn of War 2. Uh, Never really picked up Dawn of War 3, but from what I understand, maybe that's not that big of a issue.
A lot. Yeah.
Um, and one of my favorite Warhammer 40K games is the one that ties directly into this one, and that's Space Marine. I know, you and I have talked before, and it's not really. I'm a big Gen 7 gaming fan. My Xbox 360 collection is something I'm proud of. Like,
Hmm.
I just like that era of gaming a lot, and I like to kind of focus on there. And when I'm naming lists of what I feel is like a essential title from that generation, Space Marine is always on it. I know it's a Gears of War clone, but in my opinion, it's a better clone. Cliffy B, don't at me. I think Space Marines are a really great time. So finding out that Boltgun is actually kind of like I mean, we mentioned there's very little story here, but it is kind of like a spin-off sequel to Space Marine, um, in that it's the same location, same characters, takes place a few years later. Um, that's another thing I really enjoyed. You know, hearing Inquisitor Drogon, and we're on Forge World Graia, and I'm like, okay, this is just
There's a
Space
whole
Marine
bunch
again.
of proper nouns you just threw at me.
Well, I just
Uh,
gave you the entire story to Boltgun in those few proper nouns. I think that's all they actually give you in the game. The rest is just about blowing things up.
Absolutely. I mean, we might as well just go into the story then, right? With that, the story is basically non-existent. It is you're playing as a space marine named Malum Cato. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. A Stern Guard veteran space marine of the Ultramarines chapter sent by the Inquisition to Graia. I'm reading this right off of Wikipedia, if you could not tell, on a mission to Graia of great importance. Since the Orc and Chaos invasions from years before, none of this means anything to me, but the Orc and Chaos invasions from years before, the Inquisition has kept Gaia closely watched for further threats. Inquisitor Siebel of the Ordo Malus reveals that rogue tech priests of Graia have experimented with the remains of the late Inquisitor Drogon's power source. Of the late Inquisitors, of the late Inquisitor Drogon's power source. There really should have been like it's hard to see the spacing in that. And the experiments have resulted in opening a warp rift that have allowed the forces of chaos to once again invade the Forge world. Malum Cato is voiced by Rahul Kohli. I don't know if I pronounced his name correctly, but he's a
Yep.
pretty well known actor. He's been around for quite some time. He's really well known in the nerd world. Like he loves a lot of like kind of like geek and nerdy things. That's really
Yeah,
cool.
and he's a big 40K fan as well, which is why the casting was, from what I understand, it was like, oh, okay, cool. You got someone who likes 40K. I mean, I guess Henry Cavill was too expensive, but we'll go with what we can get.
Well, apparently the dev team was like they felt bad for Rahul because they felt like his talents were wasted on their game, like because he really doesn't have a lot to say in the game. Like it's
Well, he does.
very.
You just need to know how to use it, because if you never use the taunt button, you won't even know he's there.
Oh, that's
Uh,
true. I never used the taunt button.
I love the taunt button. But he actually has about over 100 unique taunts. So if you spam that button, you're going to hear probably about 100 recorded lines. Uh,
Hmm.
so it's very easy to go through without any kind of repeat.
Did you
Uh,
use the did you use the taunt a lot in the game? Like, did you ever find use for it, or is it just for funsies?
it's just for funsies. There's not really much gameplay wise that it does. For me, especially in games like this where there's not a lot of structured story that you're playing through, my favorite part is creating my own story and things. There's little story moments that you're like, oh, this was so cool when I did this. And it actually, the taunt button was part of one of my favorite moments I had while playing through it. I was in the one of the purge protocol moments, which, as you know, your servo skull tells you, purge protocol. You got to kill all the enemies before the door will open and you can move on. I had 4 health left. All of my contempt was gone. I was down to 4 health. I was in a corner. I have all of these horrors and chaos marines closing in. I don't know what to do. So I'm just like, you know what, Leroy Jenkins, right? So I hit the taunt button, and I just get like a heretics be purged, and I just ran out there and started shooting everything, and somehow I shot enough things that dropped enough health to keep me alive to shoot more things, and I I ended up getting through the whole thing, and that was just like this cool. Oh, I was just overtaken with my righteousness that I needed to purge these heretics, and I was able to pull through. So the taunt button's fun for stuff like that. It's fun to just kind of scream at the dead body of some
Of your
chaos.
enemy.
Yeah, exactly. So It's worth playing with. And one of the things, kind of going back to the story, and one of the things that does tie this in too, is one of the taunts is, I will finish what Captain Titus started.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the story of Boltgun is just knowing that there was a story in Space Marine. Um, so, Captain Titus, the main character of Space Marine, he will be the main character of Space Marine 2. But in Space Marine, you're on Forge World Graia, Inquisitor Drogon for about half of the game, I want to say, uh, acts as if he's kind of your uneasy ally. And he gets Captain Titus and the other Ultramarines to recover his power source that he says will save them. So you're on there. There's orcs. It's referred to as the Grimskull War.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to recover this Inquisitor's power source. Once you do, you find out that he's actually, I guess spoilers for Space Marine if anyone hasn't played it in the last 13 years. Once you recover the power source, it opens a warp portal, allows the chaos to come in. You find out you've been betrayed because Inquisitor Drogon was lying to you the whole time. He was corrupted already.
Wait, is this what happens in this game?
This is what happens in Space Marine.
Oh, okay.
So
That makes more sense now.
yes. So, but that ties directly into the story of Boltgun, because when they're talking about Inquisitor Drogon's power source and recovering it, it's that same thing that was used to open the warp portal in Space Marine that led to the second half of the game being you're fighting against the forces of chaos rather than orcs. So it's stuff like that gives kind of constant references back to the game Space Marine. And that's about how much story you really get out of Boltgun, is just references to what Space Marine did, in my opinion. So it was cool for me, as someone who was a fan of the Space Marine game. I can imagine if you had not played that and you just played Boltgun, you'd be like, okay, cool. So I'm going to this planet to kill things because Tech Priest Lady told me to.
Mm-hmm.
Which, to be fair, is the story of Boltgun. You're going to this planet to kill things because Tech Priest Lady told you to.
And you do find out there is basically a chaos sorcerer known as Mr. Tumnus. I'm going to call him
Mr. Tumnus. Yes,
Tumulus Samuel, who seeks power for his nefarious plans. And the sorcerer has already managed to. Basically, you're trying to find this this fragment of. You're trying to retrieve the power source that they were talking about beforehand, Drogon's power source, and Mr. Tumnus finds it beforehand. That fucking fawn, man. We all knew he was going to be evil, but now
we knew it. Yeah. Read between the lines, people.
C.S. Lewis knew it the whole time.
The Lion, the Witch, and the Warhammer 40k. We know.
Just imagine like the four kids open up the wardrobe and all of a sudden a Space Marine bursts through for the Emperor. I was not expecting this to go here, but I'm kind of here for it. Oh my god, the Chronicles of 40k. That's funny. But yeah, that's pretty much the story. You defeat Mr. Tumulus Samuel, and you beat the game. And that's all it is. There's not really much to it than that. All that it is that Inquisitor Cybele, the Inquisitor who sent you on this mission, is the one. It warns you there's still many chaos forces left on Graia, and Malum, your character, prepares for the trials he has yet to face. I would love to see a sequel to this, man. Like this reeks very much of like Doom 1, how like the story doesn't fucking matter at all. It's just an kick-ass boomer shooter. And then there's a sequel to it, and although I've heard Doom 2 is a little bit more polarizing, but still it's it's pretty cool. So I would love to see a sequel to this. I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't complain about a sequel to this just because it was so much fun. I mean, we did just have the Forges of Corruption, I think it's called, the DLC that just came out, which, I mean, is more of the same, for better or worse. I think same but better. It adds a few, it adds about 3 to 4 more hours of story missions, story in parentheses, and 2 new guns, and there was a free Horde mode update that went out to everyone, whether you got the DLC or not. But yeah, I mean, an actual sequel would be cool. I would wonder if they would add more story, if they would just stick to the, hey, no, this is an awesome boomer shooter, just get in there and blow stuff up, because it works.
I don't think they really need to do too, because the thing is that like Warhammer already has such a big world of lore and story and everything. Like, you could, I mean, you totally could. The thing is, like, I think the part of the charm of Doom is that there was no story in the first one, and they kind of created a story, or there was
Right.
very little story in the first one, and then they kind of used that as like a bare bones like framework to expand the universe type of thing.
Right.
And you can't really do that with Warhammer because there's already a pre-existing universe, which isn't a bad thing. I just think personally, I find it charming when you play a game that has like no story or like very little story, and then you play its sequel and they are able to expound upon it in ways that like both adds nuance to the original game and then makes the sequel of whatever it is even more interesting. Perfect example, not in terms of video games, but like the Fast and Furious movies. If you ever watch those, like, I'm not saying they're like they're cheesy melodrama, but the way they expand upon something where like the characters, if you ever see those movies, in the original movie, they are just street racers who steal TVs and DVD players and VHS players from moving trucks,
Yes.
and that's their whole shtick. That is the entire shtick of the movie, and it's a crime drama. It's actually a really solid movie, to the point we are now where they are just basically superheroes driving their car down dams that are exploding. It's insane, but the lore they've built around it is so fun and goofy that I can't help but love it. Now, I'm not saying that is a perfect example. I think the lore in Fast and Furious is stupid as shit, but I love it. The war
Yes.
in Lorehammer, I'm assuming, is a lot better. I don't know it, but I would assume it is significantly better.
I mean, it's possible that family and For the Emperor are equivalent, um, but no, I mean, I agree with Fast and Furious. It got silly in its own way, but it's still kind of enjoyable. Warhammer, from what I know of the lore, again, I am intimidated by the book section and stuff, but there are moments where it's a little over the top, but it's certainly more grounded in, more grounded than Fast and Furious.
Which is
But
saying something, because Fast and Furious technically takes place in our world.
right, but I do know that the Space Marine game did kind of set off some alarms with hardcore Warhammer fans just because of some of the things. I mean, I'm not familiar enough with Warhammer lore to know what things, but I do know that some of the things that were established in Space Marine, yeah, contradicted other things within Warhammer lore. So I know there is certainly a Warhammer canon that fans of Warhammer will be like, this, it needs to be this, or it's wrong. And I think we kind of do have this branching Space Marine verse that they could maybe have a little bit more fun with. If we've already decided that, Warhammer 40K Space Marine was off, and then Boltgun is continuing that story, and we're going to have Space Marine 2, um, hey, maybe they could just make that like their Space Marine cinematic universe and be like, ah, yeah, well, the rest of the lore doesn't matter. We're having fun with it. So they could certainly expand in some, and not necessarily goofy, but they could expand in their own creative ways that way based off of what they established in the game. I mean, I would love to see what Malum Kaido would do next. That would certainly be cool to see.
Agreed. Just because like it's I don't know, it's a fun enough character. it's fun enough that I would just like to see this same style of gameplay again. Um,
Yeah.
and with that said, we can go into bits of the gameplay. Because I'll actually, you know what? No, first let's talk about the overall visuals and music. Just because I'll be
Yes.
honest, I won't have much to say about the music, and normally I say that because I'm like, oh, I'm just bad at describing it. This time, because when I streamed it, I couldn't fucking hear it. I couldn't. I streamed this game the
Okay.
whole way through, and I could not hear the music at all. And when I did go back to listen to bits of it on like YouTube and just the soundtrack, it it didn't sound great to me. Like it fit, it definitely fit the game, but
Yeah.
it just I don't know, like Doom's music makes you want to fucking run through a wall. This just kind of made me want to cry. I don't know. It just didn't do it for me. What about you though?
Yeah. So Matthew Walker composed the original soundtrack for the game. He also did the sound design, which I can gush about the sound
Sound
design in
design
this
is
game.
fantastic.
But on
Absolutely.
music first, I do think it does a good job of hitting that '90s metalhead vibe feeling. Like I said, when you watch the even just the launch trailer and they kind of have that generic, metal music going, it felt like it was so nostalgically the '90s again. Um, so I do think the soundtrack to this game does a good job of capturing what it set out to do. That kind of, hey, we don't know what sound card you have installed in your computer. It could be MIDI, you might, or whatever kind of sound, but also a little better, little more improved. I mean, we're certainly not hitting like Mick Gordon levels of Doom 2016 soundtrack where you just buy that CD and take that to the gym with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what Matthew Walker did with this, I do think fits it fits what they were trying to set out. I mean, so much about this game, pros and cons, just come down to they really did a good job of capturing what they set out to do, for better or worse. And
Hmm.
I think one of the things that, maybe holds the soundtrack back is it exists within its specific formula. It exists to be this '90s. Yeah, it doesn't hit as hard as Doom. I don't think anything hits as hard as Doom. Um, but it has its own flavor, and it does throw a little bit more uh, choral bits in there as well, which is it's much more 40K. But I think overall it's again, I'm not going to put this on my top 10 soundtracks of all time, but I think
Hmm.
for the game,
It
it
fits for
captured
the
exactly
game.
what they set out to do. Yeah.
Yeah, it fits for the game. I it just doesn't do any, like there are certain tracks, like there are certain soundtracks that work really well within the context of the game and not well at all outside of that context, and I
Mhm.
kind of feel like that with this. Like I feel like the
I
soundtrack
would
just
agree with
doesn't
that.
work, just does not work out of the context of the game. Meanwhile, the visuals I think are fucking awesome. I
Amazing. Yeah.
love the visuals. This like half voxel, half like 2D, because like some, if you get up close to enemies, they're like 2D sprites on like a flat plane.
Yeah, they definitely took advantage of that 2D billboarding effect where it's just a 2D sprite that kind of follows you at whatever angle you're going, so it looks 3D, which is, the classic '90s 3D trick. Um, and it's very the enemy design is certainly very Doom inspired. You can look at that and go, yeah, that's Doom, that's Duke Nukem 3D, that's these old pixel art ones. Whereas the actual movement and traversal around the levels is a lot more like Quake, which was more 3D rendered, or Unreal Tournament or something like that. Which I think just makes a really nice blend. I really like that 2D sprites in a 3D space that you can move just so seamlessly and smoothly, and it's really nostalgic and new at the same time.
Mm-hmm. It just feel like it it works on so many different levels. I think there's lots of, it's also really beautiful at times. Like the colors, it's very vibrant. The color, the
Yes,
color
which is
palette in this
almost
game.
and the antithesis of Warhammer 40K is to say colorful, but it does a
Yeah.
very good job of being colorful.
Even though the world is pretty dark and grim, it still feels very colorful, especially when you get down to like some of the sections where there's like lava flowing and it's kind of like in an old
Mhm.
forge or something like that. Like the bright oranges and everything, it looks amazing. Like I love this like voxel style art that's been coming back. Proteus also does that. It does like a voxel style um excuse me, does like a voxel style bit of graphics. I'm curious to see how big the file installation file is for Warhammer 40k for Boltgun. It's like 6.3 gigs. Okay, I was looking at Proteus, and that one, I maybe it'll deceive me by the time that I install it and give it a try. But according to my Steam page, it's only 1.2 gigs, which is kind of nuts to me because that game looks insane. So I wonder what under the hood here in Bolt Gun, was it just compression or is it just, it's a little bit more visually like like there's a lot more to render, I guess maybe.
Right. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure. Other than, I mean, I haven't played Proteus at this point, so I don't know what's there. But certainly, I mentioned that the sound files, and the music definitely seem to be higher quality. I mean, the music goes for that style, but it also does seem to be a little less compressed than you would expect in an old 90s boomer shooter. And
Mhm.
the level of detail in the sound design is certainly going to throw. I mean, even having individual sounds for the shotgun shells hitting the ground when you reload. Um, we're going to have files for that. I certainly know that there's not a ton of enemy types in this, and they repeat pretty frequently. I think there's maybe only like 20 or so total, so we know the resources aren't going to that. Um, a big part of it could also be just how the environments are rendered. There's a lot of verticality to them.
That is true. There is a lot, like, especially they let you go so many different places in this game that I'm like, am I supposed to be here?
Right. Yeah. And so on that, I keep forgetting when I play that you can vault in this game. Like, and I just don't expect that to be a control that I can do. So, every once in a while you see the yellow paint on something. I'm like, oh, right. If I jump at this, I'll pull myself up. That's, a
Hmm.
gameplay feature. Um, but I forget what the name of the one level was, but you basically move through the warp portals over and over again, and it gives you a whole puzzle with that. But
Oh, and it's
that
like you, because it warps you out at different sides of these beams that are like
right.
way up high in the air.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
there's a
verticality
lot
in
of
them.
verticality to that one, and the bridges are going all different directions, like you're in some kind of Escher painting. So
I could see how that might take up. Like I think because I'm looking at like screenshots of Proteus, it seems a little bit more like a Doom clone, but not. I don't mean that in like a negative way, but it feels a lot more horizontal than it does vertical. Which these levels, like bolt guns levels, are very sprawling. They're pretty huge in general. Like it takes you
right.
about 20 minutes to get through a level, unless like if you're taking your time and like just exploring around and poking at the corners and all that other stuff. Real quick, just some fun facts that I want to get into before I forget about them. Just since we are kind of on the gameplay now. 'Unless there's anything else you have to say about the music and visuals, Ryan.
No, I mean, I said my piece about the sound design. That is top notch in this game. Um, I really think, I mean, it was also Matthew Walker, same person who composed the soundtrack, doing sound design for this. Just the level of detail that they put into this is it's more than they needed to do, right? The guns sound amazing.
And there's a
Um,
lot of I was just gonna say there's a lot of variety with the weapons too, and you can hear it also in the
yes.
sound design of them.
Oh yeah. Every gun sounds completely unique, and it's good in the way that you can feel the difference between each of the guns just by how they sound. You can tell when one is stronger, one's weaker, even if you didn't see the strength stat on them, just because the sound is so good at capturing what they should be. Plus, I mean, you're a walking tank basically as an ultramarine. You're in this big, heavy suit of armor. So hearing the footfalls as you walk around the map is a good reminder that you are a several ton tank of a human, even though you're gliding around the map in a boomer shooter. Uh,
Well, the weight of your character is felt through the sound design. Like like every time you land, you're reminded how, like, exactly what you said. I'm just trying to like reiterate. Like I don't think I can, like, I don't think I can overstate how much, like, you like your character, like the way you move, your character feels every bit of the character. I'm having such a
yeah.
hard time explaining this, but the weight of that,
No,
I think, is
you're
like,
right.
I think that's a really underappreciated part of it, is like your character feels heavy, but they don't move heavy.
Yes, yeah. It doesn't slog down the gameplay at all. You can still sprint and jump and all the stuff you would expect from a boomer shooter. You want to kind of glide through it, but you're hearing these big thunking footsteps as you do so. And if you jump off of a ledge down onto some enemies below, you'll splatter them because you're landing on them with the force of an entire car. Um, it does good things to remind you that you are heavy and let you feel the character's weight without slowing your movement down. You're still very agile throughout it.
And the way that your character moves, like, agile is such an odd descriptor for them, but you're right, because they are agile. They have agility, your character, but it's just so weird because the dude probably weighs as much as like a car. He's probably like two
Oh yeah,
tons
absolutely.
in that armor. But like when you launch, like, I almost feel like a weapon that I would have loved to see is, if your character sprints, if you get enough speed and you launch yourself across, that it can like explode an enemy on impact, like a football tackle type of thing. Like, I think that would have been a really cool thing to add to this game that's not in it. But like, I like imagine, like, it wouldn't work against bigger enemies, but some of those smaller grunts, like maybe like the frogs, fuck the frogs. Fuck those frogs. I hate those things so much. The plasma toads or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot of them. Not quite as bad as the Daikatana toads, but they're still bad toads.
Oh, it's so fucking obnoxious. But I would have loved like the little like grunts or minion. I don't know what type. I don't remember what they're
Yeah,
called.
like the blue horrors and stuff like
The
that.
blue horrors, but also the little tiny dudes. You know what I'm talking about? Like, you'll run around a corner and they'll throw like 50 at you all at once, but
Oh
they
yeah,
die
yeah,
in
yeah,
like
yeah.
two
Yep,
hits, and they
yep.
look like little goblins, and they toss like the shit at you. I don't even remember what they toss at you. But how cool would it be to like sprint across a level and like
Squish them.
and just like, because you can squish, like, you can squish corpses and stuff like that.
Right.
If it was just fun, but I don't think you can do it on an enemy that's still alive, right? At least it didn't happen to me.
It didn't happen to me. Maybe I didn't try enough, but it didn't happen to me.
You didn't
I,
stomp
I
your
was
enemies enough.
I was having too much fun just jibbing them from a distance with my bolter.
Well, and speaking of the bolter, we should talk about the weapons in this game. There's a bunch of different weapons. There are 8 in total in terms of just like guns that behave like guns, but then you also have your melee weapon, your chainsaw, which
Mm-hmm.
I seldom use. Did you ever use your chainsaw? Did you use it at all?
I did just because I mean that is like the next to the bolter, that is the quintessential. You're playing a Warhammer 40K game. You need to use your chainsword at some point. It was a lot of fun to do that, and it's actually there is a gameplay use for it as well. Going to the pink horrors, they behave the way they should. So if you
Oh,
kill a pink horror, it'll explode into two
blue
blue
ones.
horrors.
Yeah.
But if you chain sword them up right as they die, if you time that perfectly, they won't spawn more. Same
Oh.
thing with the aspiring champions. If you just down them, they will, pray for resurrection and they will come back. But if you can destroy them with a chainsword, or if you can destroy them with a powerful weapon, they don't get to do that. So it is a useful weapon to have for sure.
Oh, I did not know that actually. Because I mean, I did know that if you could basically turn the pink horrors into giblets before they had a chance to do anything, then yeah, then you'd be fine. You would have taken them out and they wouldn't have spawned into two of the blue ones and you're good to go. But I didn't know that an easy way to do it makes fucking sense. Like, why didn't I just think to do that? I just never did, because I never found the chainsaw useful. Like, it would take 2 or 3 attempts just like it. I think ideally it's meant for what? You soften up the enemy with a couple of shots from the bolt gun, and then you run into them with the sword. But I'm like, well, I'm just going to finish them off with the bolt gun because I've already shot them 5 times. Like, 2 more is going to do it. Like, I don't really need, like, why am I going to take more hits just to get up close with them? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly it's good as a last hit weapon. You want to use that to finish them off in a pretty spectacular way.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's not quite as useful. I keep coming back to Space Marine, but it's a lot more useful in Space Marine because you do those kinds of things, and that can help you restore health
That's what they
if you
do in
kill
Doom
things that way.
2016. When you do like the crazy kill in Doom 2016, it's the same thing. It explodes at a bunch of extra health and whatnot.
Right, exactly, and that's like it has a purpose. This is much less useful. Like you could go through the whole game without using your chainsword, um, but it also depends on. I found when I play it on my Xbox, I don't use the chainsword nearly as much, but when I play on my PC, I use it a lot more because it's just a right click at that point. Um, so
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot easier to get up close and use it on them then.
Some of the other weapons we already touched on, the bolt gun and the chainsaw, but you also have the shotgun, the plasma gun, the heavy bolter, the vengeance launcher, the Volkite caliver, the melted gun, and the grav cannon. And I love pretty much all of these weapons. I don't like to use all of them, but they all have their uses, and I have found uses for all of them in many situations. I will say the game is very kind of stingy with your ammo in this,
Yes, it
but
wants you to strategize what
exactly.
ammo you're using.
But I never felt like it was too much. Like I never, it actually struck the balance of being like, I'm terrified I'm going to run out of ammo and have nothing to fight with except for this fucking chainsaw, which, as I said before, is kind of hard to use when you have to run up to everyone to use it. But
Yeah.
it
Well,
struck that balance so well where like I was constantly being like, oh gosh, am I going to run out of ammo? Okay, no, I'm good now. I'm good now. And then you would get into one tough fight and you would lose almost all your ammo and be like, fuck, I really hope I find some more before the next fight. And then you don't. But in the middle of the fight, you'll find some. Like enemies will start dropping some, or they'll have a whole bunch in the arena that you're in. Like I think one of the best designed elements of this game is just how they use how the ammo works in this, how it keeps you feeling just on the edge of your nerves, but it never makes you go full on panic mode.
yeah, absolutely. And another thing that they borrowed that's from the RPG is the strength and toughness of the enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if you'll notice, each one of the weapons has a strength assigned to it, and every enemy will have a little toughness number next to their health bar. Um, it's like a little thing you can do if you want to play extra high level, or you can completely ignore it. But if, for example, the bolter has a strength of 5 and you're fighting an enemy that has a toughness of 7, you're going to do reduced damage to them. Now, you could use your bolter the entire time, but you're going to be wasting a lot of ammunition. You should swap over to the shotgun, or you should swap over to um, some other weapon that's tougher, and then you'll do more damage to those enemies. They'll have less resistance to it. Meanwhile, the majority of the little grunt weakling enemies that are out there, you can just mow down with just about any weapon. They'll be dead in a couple hits. So the intent from the developers was for you to use that as a way to strategize what gun you should be using at what point and be like, oh, I got a tougher enemy. Let me swap over this one. And you're supposed to learn what is used best for each enemy type. But you can also just completely ignore that and just run around and shoot things with whatever you want, and you'll still do fine. You'll just be slightly slower.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that the strategy you're talking about is like one of the best parts of it. Like I really, I have a tendency when I play games to pick a weapon I like and stay in my lane. And as you said before, like this game makes you strategize and makes you really think about which weapons are good for which situations. And like you said, with when you use stronger weapons, it helps you run through enemies more quickly. But I also found that I never wanted to do that because I would save it for the bosses.
Right. Yes.
Um, Particularly the weapons I found best against bosses were the heavy bolter. I fucking love the heavy bolter, man.
Oh, the heavy bolter is so much fun.
It's
And there's no reload, and yeah, that thunking sound again. Back to the sound design,
yep.
it's so good.
It's chonky. You can feel the chonk with every bolt that goes into the
Absolutely.
enemy. Um, the vengeance launcher, I like the idea of it. That's the thing where it looks like a revolver pistol, but
Mhm.
it shoots out a bullet that will basically embed itself into the enemy and then explode a short bit later, like a couple seconds later. I actually didn't find it as useful as I thought it would be. Like, it's a cool idea, but it never did as much damage as I was hoping it would, especially considering that it's creating tiny little grenade explosions on an enemy's body.
Right.
And
Yeah,
then, oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
agree. I was gonna say I agree. There's some that seem cool in theory, but then when you're actually using it, you just find out you never go to that gun. I'm sure there's some kind of meta reason to be using those that people who are posting the best times through levels will say is how you should do it. But I agree. There's some that I'm just like, I don't need to use this. Let me stick with my bolt gun.
Oh, and then you have the Volkite Caliver, which is basically it's like it almost shoots like it's a lava gun basically, but it's thermal rays and it shoots them. It's a continuous shotgun, so you can basically it's basically a laser beam. You're just shooting a laser beam at an enemy, and the longer you hold on to it, the more damage it does. Obviously, but what's interesting is like the last. Sorry, we didn't even. I didn't touch on one other one. Yeah, you have your bolt gun, which is your basic, like, assault rifle type of thing. Your shotgun, self-explanatory. The plasma gun is basically kind of like a rocket launcher, sort of, because like if you use the plasma gun in close range, you hurt yourself too because of the
Yes.
explosion of plasma. So it's a really strong weapon, but you can only hold 24 rounds. So it's kind of like a rocket launcher in terms of how it's used, with AoE damage and explosion damage, but also it's like a gun because you can shoot it faster than like you could a rocket launcher in any other game.
Right. And the one thing about the plasma gun that's not a ton of fun, and this is another just small nitpicky thing, like with the shotgun, you don't have to actually sit through the reload animation. You could just
Mm-hmm.
pop right over to another gun whenever you want. The plasma gun, you have to. It forces you to sit through the whole reload until you can shoot again. Um,
Oh, I didn't
it's
notice that.
Yeah, that's just a little bit of a pain, especially if you're again trying to just rush through things and mow them down. It holds you back a bit.
I also found with the shotgun, it's no fault of the game design. I think it just adds to the panic. I think it's actually kind of a good thing they do this. You can fire your shotgun before it's fully reloaded. So if you're panicking, you're like, "Oh God, there's enemies everywhere," but your shotgun's out of ammo, so you start reloading it. You might only load 5 shells of like however many you can store in a clip, and then you start firing again, and you're like, "Oh shit, why do I need to reload again already?" It's because you weren't patient enough the first
Yeah.
time, but you also couldn't be patient because there's fucking enemies everywhere and you're panicking really bad.
Yep.
But the other two the other two guns, the melta gun and the grav cannon, these are actually kind of like they're almost repeats of two previous weapons, but like souped up. The melta gun is like the shotgun, but it does a shitload more damage. and it like, oh, it's such a fucking great. I took out, like, it takes out huge chunks of enemy health, especially the boss.
And it's so cool looking.
And then the grav cannon is basically a super powered Volkite caliber. It's I the way I beat the final boss was I used a lot of the grav cannon, because that just it takes down so much. It takes down their health so fast because it's continuous.
Yes, yeah, the grav cannon, you will just cut through things with that, and that's it's important to use that. Like as we said with the strength and toughness too. That is like a use this for a boss. You're not going to get a ton of ammo for it, but use it on those tough fights.
Um, so I out of these ones here, out of the main weapons here, including the actually no, minus the chainsaw, which would you say is your favorite? Like out of the weapons in the game, which one would you go for?
Oh, absolutely, the heavy bolter. I
That's me too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't get away from that one. It doesn't reload. You just kind of go through it. It's like it's a chain gun, but yeah, it's very versatile, and I used that every time I had ammo for it. It was a great one to use.
Now, things that augment your gameplay that can kind of make things a little bit more interesting is the power ups. And there's lots of different power ups in this game, very much in the Doom sense, where they are considered secrets. Every time you find a power up,
Yes.
it's considered a secret. So when you beat the level, not only does it tell you which percentage of enemies that you have killed, it tells you how many. How long it took you to beat the level and how many secrets that you found. I didn't find all the secrets. I know if I really went back and searched for them, I probably could. Um, the There's a bunch of different ones. I'll be honest, I almost never understood what half of them did. Like some of them were pretty, infinite ammo is one. That one I understood. The machine spirit, I'm pretty sure I've I've gotten that one a bunch, but I almost always have it when I have the bolt gun, and that basically it gives a power up, a temporary power up to whichever weapon you have at the time, that whichever weapon you are wielding at the time you pick
Yes.
up the power up. And I never really I never really got that. I only almost always used the bolt gun. I always had it when I picked it up. And so I never got to see the other cool shit that the other things do. I'm kind of bummed about that. There's also munitions boon, which basically just increases the amount of ammo you can hold. I don't believe it's a permanent thing. I think once you go underneath it. So, for example, the bolt gun goes from 150 total rounds to 200 that you can store in reserve. But I'm assuming once you drop down to 150, it doesn't go back up to 200. Like it just, you basically get an extra 50 round. I don't know. Maybe it's just permanent throughout the rest of the level until the level's over. I'm not entirely sure. I never noticed it well enough, but
Yes,
that's
some of the power ups last longer. Some of them are on a short timer. Um, I'll be honest, I'm kind of with you. I never really went through and got all of them from every single level. It was more of a I turn a corner and there's something glowing at me. I'm like, oh, neat, I found one. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's usually like six or so in each level, and I would need a guide to go back and find them all. I just never got around to actually doing it. But yes, there's some that will last longer. They'll last for the duration of the level, and again, they affect whatever gun you're currently carrying. And then others will give you just temporary buffs that maybe you get for 30 seconds or so.
the one I liked the most, and I never found often, was the Aura of Doom one, and it's the one that has like a, it almost looks like the way it's described on the wiki is that it's a large gauntlet grasping an iron halo. And basically it just makes you, it doesn't make you invincible, but it like quadruples your damage for like 30 seconds.
Yeah,
And man, if you can find one of those with a boss, it like it fucking destroys everything.
yeah, they're very useful to find. Um, Again, I didn't play hardcore enough that I made it a priority to find them. But if you every time I found them, I'm like, oh, we're gonna have fun for a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And they were fine enough. I do like looking for secrets, and I think that this game's secrets are fun enough that it would make the fact that they tell you how many you find is honestly really great because it lets you know exactly what you've missed. And since the levels, like, they're kind of long, but overall they're pretty linear, with the exception of some levels where, like, some of the later level design was interesting, where like they would have like a hub section, and you could only like the final set, like the exit to the level would be pretty close to it, but in order to get access to it you had to go through all these other like
Yeah,
ancillary like areas and kind of warp around and grab different keys only to get the final keys so you could get through. So they would do a lot of that type of stuff. I would say where this game falls short, hold on. Let me talk about one last thing that I love, and we've touched on it a whole bunch, but the controls. The
okay, yeah,
controls of
yeah.
this game are perfect.
It's exactly what you would want from a boomer shooter. It's smooth, it's fast, it's really responsive. They did a really, really, really good job just tightening that up, just making it feel great.
It's so good, man. I love it, it. Honestly, when I was playing it, because at the time, the reason I posted this poll to do a boomer shooter month was because at that time earlier this year, I was in the throes of doing nothing but JRPGs nonstop. Excuse me, JRPGs.
I do that for fun.
So I mean, I love JRPGs, but like I played Grand Soul Story, which was an indie game. Shout out to Moon Soul Games, but it's in a JRPG style. Then I played Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3 back to back to back, while also playing Chrono Trigger during all the time. And then I want to say I was also playing Astral Chain on my Switch for the previous Patreon poll, and while that one was a ton of fun, it still was like I was kind of. I think I had beaten that. I forget when exactly. When did I actually record that episode? I recorded that episode in June, even though it was out in July. So yeah, I had just finished. I was finishing up Chrono Trigger, I want to say, while playing Astral Chain. So realistically, during that time, for like for like a 1 to 2 month span, maybe I would say it's like a 2 to 3 month span. Actually, it was nothing but JRPGs and freaking Astral Chain. And so I was like, man, I still like JRPGs, and there's a lot that I want to play that are on my list, but I really just want something where I don't have to think. And boy, did Warhammer deliver. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as
No, no,
a
I
sincere, just frenetic, smooth, like kinetic and frenetic, smooth action. It was just everything about it just felt so good. How fast you run, how far you jump, the unrealistic nature of holding 8 weapons at once. Like every single bit, I
yeah,
was like, oh, just injected in my veins.
yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if you're coming off of a JRPG binge and you need to change, this is about as opposite of that as you can get. Right? There's not really, boomer shooters. We're not getting much story. We're not really weighing anything down with RPG mechanics. It's not even like I mean, there's a little bit of it because at the beginning of each chapter you have to go find all your guns again, but it's not like we have that Metroid kind of, oh, you're weak and powerless at the beginning and then you get stronger as you go. No, you kind of just kick out of the pod and you're already ready to fight. You're blowing things up in a second, and it's very relaxing in a weird way to just
Yeah.
run around just jibbing everything up with your bolt gun, and you know you can just kind of shut your brain off, run through the level, jump, whatever you need to do. It's so smooth and it's so satisfying, and yeah, when you come from the slow story driven pace of a JRPG that's going to take you 40 or so hours to get through, and then you can go into a game like Boltgun where you can play it in 6 to 8 hours and you're just constant action the entire time. I absolutely understand why that's a big shift in what you're spending your time doing.
Well, I think it kind of is the reason it works so well for that is the gameplay loop is very simple. It's simple but satisfying. And because like JRPGs, there's always going to be strategy involved, even if it's light strategy, even if it's strategy you don't even have to think about, like, okay, my guy's hurt, I have to heal them up with potions or a cure spell or whatever version of that is in whichever RPG you're playing, right? um there's always some element of having to pick a strategy and then revise your strategy for it, versus in this, like, yeah, you're being reactive in some elements, especially when an enemy jumps out at you, but by and large you're the one start like initiating all the action. You're running into the den of enemies and blowing them all to hell, like it's much more simple. All you have to do is run and shoot. It's literally like, theoretically, you only need two buttons to really do it. You just W on the keyboard and left mouse click, and there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Now obviously you need more for reloading and strafing, and you have to turn the mouse and all that stuff, but you get the idea. It's just so simple, but it still would be easy to fuck up. Like, you can make a bad, like, there's so many bad first person shooters out there. This one works just so well because it is just so simple. It is such a refined version of the boomer shooter formula that I think it's an immense amount of fun to play. Now, where I do think that there are some flaws, uh they some of the I didn't notice it until I was reading some of the reviews after I had beaten the game and kind of collected my own thoughts. And the things that I still like. The review didn't change that, but one thing the review brought up that I realized that, like, it did negative, like, I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but the review kind of helped me find the vocabulary to do it. The enemy AI isn't that interesting. um
No, it's bad.
it's
You can just say it's bad. The AI is bad.
it's bad. It's just boring. There's not, like, every enemy does the same thing. Like, there's easy ways to cheese enemies as well, and that's fine. But, like, if you're gonna cheese an enemy, you want to feel like you got a one up on the system. Like, part
Yeah.
of the joy is that, like, I've beat the computer. The computer, like, I figured this out, and the computer can't stop me. You don't feel like that when you play Boltgun. Like, you just kind of, like, run through hordes of enemies, and the enemies, honestly, some of them are more annoying than actually fun. Like, and not in a good way. Like, there's a, like, I would say, like, for example, the stupid fucking toads are an example of a good annoying. I hate them. I never
Yeah.
want to fight them again, but they serve a really good purpose, versus the fucking, like, random no name soldiers that for some reason can shoot rocket launchers incredibly fast and deal a shitload of damage in a small amount of time. And it's like, dude, I didn't even have a fucking chance. Like, it I died a handful of times to those guys, but, like, they're not fun. They don't have any interesting movement tech or anything like that. They just have one really powerful attack, and that's not that interesting. Because at least with the plague toads, as much as I fucking hate them, they'll shoot acid at you. They'll shoot their tongue out at you, which will pull you closer, and then they'll shoot acid at you. Like, there's some mechanics you have to worry about with them, but by and large there really wasn't much to it. I would say the only other enemy that I truly detested was the evils. I don't know what the name of them are. They were like the evil space marine or an evil inquisitor or something like that. Let me see if I can find a picture, or I can
The
find,
chaos.
it's one of the one, it might be the chaos, whichever one does melee stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So the aspiring champions, the ones that can read, and the Chaos Marines themselves will just run right up to you with their chain swords. Um,
Yes. Yeah, I hate them. I hate those because, like, they come out of nowhere, and if you don't have the right weapon out, which you might panic and not hit, like, the weapon can knock them back, but it's not always guaranteed. I don't like fighting them. I think they're an okay enemy, but I find them more cheap than fun, versus the toads. I find, like, that good kind of annoying, where, like, I never found the toads
right.
too cheap, but they weren't always fun, but in a good way. Like, I'm happy they weren't fun because it made the challenge that much more enjoyable when I finally beat them. Also the flamers. I don't like the exalted flamer and the flame people or whatever. What is it called? Yeah, they're called flamers. I
Yeah, the
also don't
flavors.
like them.
Yeah, I mean, frustrating enemy types. That's a tale as old as time. There's always something in a game that I like. Oh my
A
god, another
flame
one of
as
these
old
things.
as time.
And like I said, there's only like 20 enemy types in this game, and they repeat a lot. Kind of like I said earlier in the episode too. I mean, this game it perfectly captures what it set out to do, for better or worse. And in a lot of those things, I can chalk that up to, man, they got the visuals perfect, they got the gameplay perfect. But then there's also the other things that honestly I would say are pretty characteristic of an early 90s MS DOS, boomer shooter like Doom or something like that. Where, yeah, I mean, AI wasn't exactly at the forefront back then either. We just didn't know any better. And nowadays, having a modern game with poor AI feels like a bad thing because we expect so much more. Um, and I'm not saying that to give Boltgun a pass for the AI, because I do also agree with you that, like, cheesing the enemies doesn't always feel, it doesn't equate to fun. You want to feel like you've earned your boss kill. Uh, but I can also say, if I'm immersing myself in some 90s nostalgia, I don't notice the bad AI as much because I kind of expect it to be there. Um,
I
and
think
then, oh,
sorry, finish what you're saying.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, like, yeah, I mean, again, we are playing a modern game. This is a game that just came out, so the technology is absolutely there to make these enemy types react in different ways and to make them smart enough to not just clip into the corner of a crate and get stuck there. Um, but at the same time, it at least feels authentic. Uh, Again, for better or worse.
I think for me, it's not necessarily that it like feeling authentic wouldn't be bad. I think like so it's been a minute since I've played the original Doom, but I think the original Doom, even though there's limitations on the AI, the level design and the gameplay design is so strong, it kind of works in conjunction with that AI, like what the AI is able to do. This kind of feels like it's not that they work against each other, but they don't work with each other either. I just always found like the enemies, I think it kind of got to me after a little while. There was a lot, especially towards the end of the game. I'm like, this game is getting way too fucking long. Like I'm ready for it to be done. Um, Now I don't always like to go in. I don't always like to use that as an actual criticism because everyone has different tolerance levels, and I don't think that just because something bored me a little bit quicker wouldn't mean that it would bore you a little bit quicker. But for me at least, the enemies kind of added to the boredom a little bit. Um, so yeah, that was just one of the big things for me with that in terms of like an issue I had with the game. I thought the um, enemy AI was not great. I also think some of the level design is a little wonky. There's some times where there's just a level where just the level feel like it doesn't feel like there's any rhyme or reason to the pacing, excuse me, of some levels. Like some levels will be crazy short, and then the next one will be absolutely bonkers long, and then the one after that will be a normal one, a couple more normal ones, and then there's another bonkers long one, and it doesn't feel like if you're going to make something long, you have to have like, I almost feel like you need like a story element to like give it value to the player, and otherwise the level just keeps on going and going. I'm like, okay, is this done yet? Like, I'm ready for this level to be done. I've been here for so long. The one that actually got me was the one we mentioned before with like all the portals and it's warping to the
Yeah.
different uh like uh parts of the this big chamber that, like you said, lots of verticality, and you're on these giant like rails, like these like rafters that go in different directions. And I didn't hate that at first, but then it was like, because it was so hard to figure out which was going where, it made the level design got under my skin after a little while, and it was hard to tell, like, okay, how close am I going the right way? Am I not going the right way? I was able to figure it out eventually because I think I followed something and I ended up thinking I think I
Mhm.
ended up completing the that chapter by accident almost. I'm like, oh, I guess that worked, but I don't know if that was the intended way to do it. You know?
Yes, I mean, I agree with you on the level design. Some of them are very linear. You just kind of can intuitively feel where you're going through. Others, you do feel like you're going in circles and you feel like you're lost. One of the big criticisms of the game at launch was that there was no map, which, again, for a 90s boomer shooter, wouldn't be abnormal to not have a map, but this is 2024. We expect there to be a map. And they did, to their credit, add the navigation button. So if you hit the navigation button, your servo skull puts out a trail for you to follow, which does help with those longer levels. But it's also not a super obvious feature. You could totally not even know that that button existed. Um, my first,
I
you
don't think
know,
I knew there was a map button.
yeah, if you hit, I think it was the select button when I played on Xbox, or it's the N key when I play on PC, it'll put a little trail on the ground that will point you where to go.
Oh, I might have known that and forgot about it.
Another thing that's also helpful, just as a quick side note, because I am always someone who likes to shout out accessibility features because I think gaming's for everybody and there shouldn't be a skill cap for it. I mean, we're here to have fun.
Hmm.
So I appreciate that this game in the options, if you go into the accessibility settings, you'll find a lot of things that other games would call cheats. And I like that it's not cheats here, it's accessibility. You can get, you know, infinite ammo, you can get invulnerability, you can get that navigation line always turned on. There's a lot of things there that, you know, whatever your skill as a gamer and whatever your familiarity with the genre is, you can still progress through this game nice and, you know, at whatever pace works best for you. But turning that navigation line on the whole time, you know, that could keep you from getting stuck or spinning around in circles. Or you can only push the key whenever you want to and just get a little hint, or you can just not hit the key at all and find your own way and, you know, sniff through the level. It gives you all those different ways to take it, which
Hmm.
I think it's great. I'm always, again, I'm always for having more options for people. Let me, you know, as a hardcore gamer, not use those options, or let me as a casual gamer use them because, hey, I work hard. I've been out all day. I just want to come home and I just want to blow things up. I don't want to think too much. It's good to have those things there. But I agree that the level design almost kind of needs those navigation hints at times, or you're just
Yeah.
wasting a ton of time going in circles. And to what you said about the game felt like it was going on too long by the time you get to the later levels. It's funny because when we mentioned this is like a 6 to 8 hour game, and for an 8 hour game to feel like it's going on too long, that is kind of indicative of a problem there. And I think that really comes down more to it does get repetitive. There's not enough variety in the enemies. There's not, you know, I mean, there's variety in the level design, but it does kind of feel like you're passing through the same hallways multiple times. Not that they aren't beautiful, but by the time you get to the end of the game, you're like, haven't I been here before? Haven't I done this? And
Hmm.
I'm fighting the same thing I was fighting before. Um, you know, so there is certainly some drop off there in the level of fun and excitement the longer you go on. I don't think it's game breaking, and I don't think it's, you know, it didn't ruin the game for me, but I definitely did feel that slowdown, and I understand completely what you're saying with, am I done yet? Like, it feels like this is going on too long. And I agree. If there was like story elements to kind of drive you forward, or if there was more variety, that would certainly help. You know, again, I'll keep drawing comparisons to Space Marine because, hey, we're in the same universe here. But like that game completely changes direction at about the, I mean, I'm not exactly halfway point, but probably, you know, probably about 2/3 point. you get to a point where all of a sudden you're now fighting the forces of chaos instead of fighting orcs, and it's like, hey, cool, new game, let's keep going. um, Boltgun does throw those variety of enemies at you, but it feels like they're throwing the same variety of enemies at you from the
Hmm.
beginning all the way to the end.
Yep, uh, it's an interesting way to think about like the accessibility options. Like that could be a larger discussion. Like how like is something an accessibility option if it breaks the game? Like the like invulnerability to me, and like it kind of defeats the purpose of the spirit, like the intent of the game. But at the same time, based off our Celeste conversation, like I'm all for it in Celeste, and I feel weird about having like invulnerability, unlimited ammo, like accessibility option in this. Like to me, that's a cheat. But at the same time, like that contradicts kind of like what my feelings were for Celeste. I have some conflicted feelings I'm finding with
I
this.
mean, my opinion as a able-bodied, 30 something who has been playing video games my entire life, you know, I can play with a certain level of dexterity. I can play with a certain level of skill, muscle memory that I've, accumulated over the years. But what if I was partially paralyzed? What if I was older? What if this was the first video game I ever played? What if, there's all these other things that, yeah, I mean, it's game breaking to me. I don't need it. But it does make it accessible. And that's why I think accessibility is a good name to put on it, because you don't know who's sitting behind the keyboard or who's holding the controller, or, what's going on. Somebody might need a little extra assistance to even be able to enjoy the game that might otherwise be off limits for them. Um, Without invulnerability, they might not be able to make it through a level just because they're not dexterous enough to do so, or because they're not familiar enough with games in general. But by turning that on, they can get through the level, they can have a great time, they can see the artwork, they can hear the music, they can still get that sense of, oh, I took down the boss and I moved on to chapter 2. I mean, there's always accomplishment for it. So I mean, we've been calling them cheats my entire life. I still have my Blockbuster Bible of cheats that you could buy. Like, I mean, cheats is a term for it, but I think it's a good. Again, you said this could be a whole nother discussion, but I think shifting it from cheats as kind of like a negative, you're breaking the game and not playing it the way it's supposed to be played, to accessibility, which is, hey, we just want you to play the game, and we want you to
Well,
play the game in whatever way is fun for you.
yeah, and this could be a whole other topic because I'm not anti-accessibility by any stretch, but I guess it just to me it depends on a game by game basis, because I feel like some things, if it's realistically it's up to the developers if it takes away from the intent of the game, right? Like I
Right.
guess to me, it just like for this game in particular, like to me, I wouldn't have an issue if you just made like the enemy AI, like you don't have unlimited ammo and vulnerability, but you really dumb down the enemy AI, or you make it less, and that's how you would do it for people who might not be as able-bodied. You're still
Yeah.
giving them, because otherwise there's no challenge. Like if you can't
Yes.
die, and there and from everything that I've always read online about like accessibility options, it's not about making the game easier. They don't want they don't want the challenge to go away. They don't want the challenge to go away. They just want to be able to play it. And
Yeah.
depending, and so that this is a wider conversation, so I don't really know where I stand with that. It's not really worth
No,
going into here.
I agree with you. I mean, games, at the end of the day, there needs to be some kind of risk and reward. You don't want to just, I mean, you could have fun just seeing things explode on the screen, but I get what you're saying in that the game needs to give you some kind of challenge that you're trying to overcome, so that you get that sense of accomplishment when you overcome it. And that doesn't mean that there's people out there who need it just handed to them. They could certainly be available for the challenge. I guess, and that's with the easier difficulties. So the way the difficulty in Boltgun, coming back, I guess specifically to Boltgun, works is turning up the difficulties just changes the variety of enemy types you get. So you'll get more of the stronger enemies, but it doesn't change how much health they have or anything like that. It'll change the amount of them you'll get, and it also affects how much damage they do to you. So kind of what you're saying with like, you don't need to be invulnerable, but easy mode makes it so you can take a lot more hits. So if you play on easy difficulty instead of
invulnerability or something.
Yes, yeah. No, I was trying to remember what the highest difficulty setting. It was very Warhammery. It's late and it's escaping my mind right now. But either way, if you play on the higher difficulties, you're going to have a lot more challenge. You play on lower difficulty, you might be able to get through. So that's kind of accessibility there as well. But I don't know. You never know how much of a stepping stool someone needs. So I just appreciate that the settings are there.
I might have to talk to some accessibility advocates and consultants and stuff like that, because I would love to get their takes on it. Because like obviously this is coming from my perspective of as an able-bodied person, and that's not really like the proper perspective for this. There's the people who advocate and who are part of that community and who consult to make games more accessible for them, for that community. I think would be a much more appropriate voice. I might do a full like a discussion based episode on this. I think that'd be really interesting.
That would be a great episode. I think you should definitely do that. As a listener, I would love to hear it.
And actually, as a quick shout out, not to bring down the bring the room down or anything like that. Shout out to I shouldn't say shout out, I guess, but rest in peace, actually, to previous guest to the show, Brandon Cole. I don't know if I ever said it on the podcast. I talked about it on Twitter. I might have mentioned it a while ago. I had for those who did not listen to that episode, Brandon Cole was a blind accessibility advocate and consultant for video games. He worked on The Last of Us Remastered, both 1 and 2, and made those games playable for the blind community, which is just absolutely bonkers to think about. His account is still active. His wife, well, they weren't able to get married due to some... He told me about it. They had if they got married, then their tax situation would have been fucked or something like that. It was wild.
That's terrible.
So because of what his needs, I don't know. He talked about it a little bit, and even if I did remember, I wouldn't go into any of that. That's their own personal stuff. But he's talked about it on other podcasts too. So I'm not telling any tales out of school with that. But he was an awesome guest, one of my favorite guests I've ever had on the show, and he passed away. How long ago was this now? At the end of June this year, he passed away, kind of suddenly, and it's a damn shame. He was a really good person, and he would have been a great person to have on the episode to talk about accessibility options and is something in accessibility, what we just talked about. Just want to talk about him here, even though it wasn't really intended. I wasn't planning on doing any type of I wasn't planning on commenting on it at all during an episode, but it kind of came up with this. And you know what? If I do that episode, then maybe that I'll probably bring him up again, because he was a good dude. Yeah. So rest in peace, Brandon. Awesome person. Absolutely. He stopped by one of my streams sometime after we had recorded. It was a couple months. It was almost a year after we'd recorded. And he just stopped by one of my streams and just was hanging out. He's a good dude. Good person.
Yeah. Well, rest in peace, Brandon.
Yeah. Sorry not to bring down the room towards the end of the recording.
I didn't mean to steer us too far down that hole either, but that's a good time for a tribute, and it's it's always sad when people pass too soon.
It was way too soon, man. But anyway, do you have anything else you want to talk about with this game, Ryan? Is there any other topics you want to go into? I feel like we've talked about the gameplay and the music and the story well enough, but is there any, like, are there any power-ups that you wanted to talk about? Any other, like, in-game items that we didn't get to talk on that you would like to talk about? Yeah, any final thoughts or any other things you want to dive into before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, not really. I think we covered just about everything I really feel like I personally would want to praise about this game and the opportunity to have, the platform to be on a show about it. Um, I really appreciate the things that it does well. I do agree it's not a perfect game, and the criticisms we raised, and not only have I seen raised other places as well, but I mean they're very fair. I feel them myself, and again, I keep coming back to saying I think Boltgun is an example of a game that accomplished what it set out to do, for better or worse. And it the good parts it did really well, and it hit that nostalgia in almost a miraculous kind of way. I mean, I've played a lot of nostalgic indie games that try to do that, and some of them get it right. Others feel like it's okay. You used pixel art, but Bolt Gun, I feel like I could have been going to a friend's house after school and playing this on his computer. I don't know why I'm always on. I didn't have a nice computer until I was older, so like, I had my dad had Chuck Yeager's Flight Simulator running on MS DOS, and that was like the only game that I had on my computer in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So all of my computer gaming was always done at like a friend's house. Um, but, you know, I just, I want to praise the developers for pulling off the art style as well as they did. We talked about that 2D billboarding in a 3D environment and how cool that looks. I want to, shout from the rooftops again how much I love the sound design in this. Amazing. Way more detail than they needed to do, and I am here for it. I love that. And yeah, it really scratches that,
Non-RPG
Doom,
itch.
Quake. Yeah, it feels like this is, this is the perfect. I just got home from work at the end of the day, which is what I did today. So I should probably be playing Boltgun instead of talking about it. But it's it's that perfect. Just shut your brain off, blow some things up, feel like a badass, and that's all it needs to be. It doesn't need to be anything else. It doesn't need to have a deep story. It's just fun, which is what games should be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, exactly. It's just pure fun and exactly what games are meant to be. You don't need a story. You don't need anything. It is just it's just the smoothest pulse pounding action I've ever you'll ever experience. Not you'll ever experience, but some of the most smooth and pulse pounding action you'll ever experience. Real quick before I continue my final thoughts, I forgot I had some other background history notes that I forgot to bring up while we were chatting. There's a quote from Wargamer, the website Wargamer, where Grant Stewart, who was the lead designer, one of the things he was saying about the development of the game, the game took about the game took about 2 to 2.5 years to develop. And so I'm actually going to read the small snippet directly from the article. There's something very special about 90s Warhammer, Stewart says, but adds the choice of setting for the game isn't purely nostalgic. Quote unquote, it's also particularly suited to a boomer shooter. It's bright and colorful and garish and violent and over the top. And I agree with him. And the team, when they were developing the game, noted different aspects of boomer shooters that they love. The barrier to entry is low. Like we were saying before, it's not complex. You just run and shoot. Guns and gore. It definitely checks that box off. Visceral, immediate feedback. That, and also as a tie-in with that, and something you were mentioning, Ryan, with the sound feedback. So that visceral, immediate feedback in terms of gameplay, but also I think the sound feedback really kind of reinforces that visceral gameplay feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So those were the 4 different things that they mentioned. But yeah, on to my personal thoughts of the game, like our kind of final thoughts. The game was clearly a labor of love. we mentioned before how the whole team really liked Warhammer. Some of them still had figures from the 90s. They wanted to make this before they even knew they could, type of thing, whether it's a boomer shoot or otherwise. They just wanted to make a Warhammer game. It controls crazily well, as we've said before. And while there are some pacing issues with in terms of the level design and stuff like that, it still is like one of the most fun shooters I've played in quite some time, and it really scratched that boomer shooter itch. I was really happy I finally got to play it. It was a great experience.
Yeah, yeah. If you were looking for a boomer shooter, I would highly recommend this to anyone who's, maybe like, oh, do I want to go play Doom? I mean, the answer is yes, you do. But if it's like, do I want to play Doom? Do I want to play Quake? Do I want to play, hey, jump in on Boltgun. This is a great game to just, it does everything that you would want it to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's not a JRPG.
It's not a JRPG. That's a big plus. That was a big plus for me in my book for when I played it. But yeah, I think that will do it for this episode of Still Loading, y'all. This was a fun conversation that you went into a couple different places I wasn't expecting. So, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me, man. This was a lot of fun. Thank you for coming on. Where can the good people find you online, and is there anything you would like to promote?
Nothing to promote at the moment, but I am Paperclips on Threads. I've actually been using that quite a bit lately. So that's PAAPERCLIPS. Yeah, follow me on there. I've been using that because I've been having some really great conversations with people. I don't even know who these people are. I'm just like suddenly meeting people and we're just talking about games every single day. It's been great. So that and Instagram, those are really the again, also Paperclips. Those are the two best places to follow me.
Please go follow Ryan on both those locations. He's much more active on Threads than I am. I really need to start being more active on Threads. But in speaking of social media, you can follow me at Still Loading Pod on all those different locations: Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, because I refuse to call it the other name. Twitch is also at Still Loading Pod, at Still Loading Podcast on YouTube. If you want to support the show, you can do so in a number of ways. You can give it a 5-star rating or review on whichever podcasting app you use, because it helps more people find the show and it pleases the algorithm gods. And it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. And I like feeling warm and fuzzy. You can also support the show monetarily by going over to Patreon. At patreon.com/stillloadingpod for $1 a month. And actually, Ryan here is a patron, so shout out to you, Ryan, for being a patron. Thank you for that. For $1 a month, you get all the episodes a little bit earlier with better audio quality, as well as access to patron voting rights. And there's at least 4 to 5 polls per year, so that's just for $1 a month, you get all that. For $3 a month, you get everything prior plus patron shoutouts, which you heard at the beginning of this episode. For $4 a month, you get everything prior plus 2 mini bonus episodes. And for $5 a month, you get everything I mentioned prior plus access to my monthly movie podcast, which, when this episode comes out, we will actually be starting a new one, because the last episode of my current thing, which was Still Bonding, a monthly James Bond podcast where me and a bunch of friends bonded over 007, that ended in October, actually. This is coming out in November. So in just a little bit of time, in like a week or so, it's going to be kicking off the next series, which is Still Family, my Fast and Furious rewatch series, where all my guests who join me aren't just friends, they're family. There's some other cheesy tagline I gotta figure out for that still. But yeah, so that's all over at patreon.com/stillloadingpod. But yeah, that's it. That's all the time I got for you on this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. Ryan, thank you once again for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.